This talk and the JavaScript for WordPress conference are brought to you by our sponsors at 10up and WP Buffs. 10up makes a better web with finely crafted websites and tools for content creators. Check out their junior and senior dev positions at 10up.com/careers. WP Buffs provides 24/7 fully managed support and white label agency services. Find out how they can help you focus on what you do best at wpbuffs.com/partnerships.
Hey everyone, so glad to be speaking with you today. A big thanks to Zach for organizing the JavaScript for WordPress conference today. I'm super excited to be speaking with you today about server-side rendered JavaScript applications, specifically with Vue.js and WordPress. Now, what the heck is a server-side rendered JavaScript application? Well, basically it's running Vue.js on the server in a server environment like Node and delivering raw HTML, CSS, and JavaScript onto the browser, right? Then the Vue app takes over and then you've got a traditional single page application, right? Traditionally, what happens is if you're running Vue or React, what the server delivers is your build file, your JavaScript file. Then the browser then executes that JavaScript, and JavaScript then builds all the nodes and stuff like that. Now, there are some that say there are performance concerns. There are others that say there are SEO concerns. Whatever the case may be, one of the reasons why you want to do this is really to maintain a balance between creating really rich UIs, having a really cool developer experience, but at the same time, keeping performance in consideration and SEO as well. And so today I will show you one method of writing server-side rendered JavaScript applications with a Vue framework called KnuxJS. Now, specifically, we'll be building out a content-based site, grabbing posts from the WordPress REST API, and I'm purposely focusing in on a content-centric site, really to emphasize things like SEO, performance, which is what one of the things that server-side rendered JavaScript applications will help boost, right? Now, today my assumptions are that Vue, you've kind of messed around with Vue, or even you've done some React stuff as well. I'm not here today really to teach you how to use Vue. It's more focused on using Vue in a server-side rendered environment, more so than how to use Vue. All right, let's get to it. So let's begin with the end in mind. What we're kind of going to be looking for, or what we're going to be building today, is something like this. So I work for Zeek Interactive. We are a WordPress agency. We do a lot of other things outside of WordPress as well, but a lot of the stuff we do is with WordPress. So I'm going to actually be creating kind of like a form of the Zeek homepage, if you will. It's a very traditional content-centric type of site, right? You've got like a hero on the top with a call to action, and then more importantly to us is on the homepage, I'm going to have, I'm going to be getting WordPress posts based on category, right? Get me the 3 most recent posts from the blog category, the 3 most recent posts from the WordPress category, and the 3 most recent posts from the how-to category, right? And how it's important to us, right? Like, there are tons of tutorials out there that says like how to get posts from the WordPress API from React or from Vue. That's not what we're solving here. What we're trying to solve is how do we get posts from the WordPress REST API in a server-side rendered environment and send that pure HTML to the browser instead of the browser fetching those posts and rendering them on the DOM. So that's a really big differentiation here is, remember, we're actually getting these posts in the server with Vue and then sending them to the browser already in its HTML format. Vue then will take over and do what it needs to do in terms of any UI enhancements. But for our purposes, we're pretty much saying, hey, on the server Vue, go get me these posts before the actual browser tries to do it itself, right? On top of that, we'll have some routing in place that will get, the single post based on the ID. And then if we have time, we may mess around with like a related here at the bottom to get more posts after the page loads, right? And then we can kind of pop back over to the homepage and, browse some more throughout the site. So that's kind of what we're striving to build it's not a big application in terms of the complexity of it. I purposely chose like a content heavy site because these are a lot of the sites that we build. These are the kind of sites that are very big on SEO, right? They want to make sure that there isn't JavaScript rendering this information. There are some that believe that isn't indexable. Some do. Either case, you know that if it's HTML delivered, that is indexable. You really can't fight that argument too much, right? Another thing is performance. You want this page loading quickly. If it's actually HTML that's being delivered, that's fast, right? Instead of JavaScript actually trying to make this data on the DOM. Now, in terms of, again, we're actually using KnuxJS, or Nuxt rather. To get started with Nuxt, there are tons of tutorials out there actually how to get started with Nuxt and how to set it up. I don't want to walk everyone through like step by step. Tons of tutorials out there to actually get started. Create Nuxt app is actually kind of a newer way to do it. It's kind of your very typical CLI to actually create things. They do a pretty good job of actually walking you through. You'll be able to choose what kind of server-side framework you want to use with. I generally go with Express. It's something that I'm more familiar with. If you're familiar with any one of these, great. If you're not familiar with any of them, that's no big deal too. I would go with Express. I find that to be, for me, the easiest to work with. But getting started, you're really not going to do anything really with Express or any kind of middleware things or getting into the nuts and crannies of Express and Node. So I'd go with Express. For the purposes of today's demo, I'm actually using the Tailwind UI framework. It's a utility-based CSS framework. Really, really cool. I like what they're doing. But again, choose what you want. This Create Nuxt app allows you to choose Bootstrap if you want, or Vuetify, or Bulma, or none. If you kind of just roll your own, that's cool too. The nice thing is that if you choose one of these, it'll bake and configure everything within the Nuxt framework for you. So there is no additional cost for you in sense of like starting things up, right? The last thing it's going to ask you is this Axios module. So Nuxt there is a Nuxt Axios module available to us within Nuxt. Axios is an HTTP library. That's how actually we're going to be making a lot of our GET requests on the server and on the browser to the WordPress REST API. So the nice thing is when you're starting your Nuxt app, the CLI will actually ask you if you want Axios part of the application. If you do, it'll add all kinds of configurations for you out of the box and make Axios globally available to you. So it makes working within HTTP requests a lot more easy than kind of trying to fire some random, GET requests here and there. And then if you wanted to get some linting, you can do that on your own. Okay. I've gone ahead and loaded up a starter with a lot of Bootstrap styles. I didn't want to spend much time, walking through and like you see me, doing npm install and all that stuff and a lot of styling. I really wanted to make sure that we get the core understanding of what Nuxt is, how it interacts with the REST API, and a lot of wins that you can actually have using a server-side rendered framework as opposed to traditional browser-based single page application that the JavaScript on the browser actually fetches and renders data, right? So a lot of the stuff already I have. I just already included like the hero. For now I have placeholders for like blog post, WordPress, and the how-to posts, right? So the first thing I really want to get into is this Nuxt config file. This file is going to have a lot of information about your Nuxt app. I'm not going to go through each one, but for now, what's most important to us is this Axios module configuration, right? Remember, Axios is going to be our HTTP library. If you've never used Axios before, maybe you use jQuery to do a lot of your GET and POST requests, right? Axios is what's going to be our library to make these nice requests. The nice thing about it is it's a promise space, so we can, be hotshots and use things like async await nicely. So it really works well, and especially works really well within a Vue Nuxt environment, right? So the very first thing we want to do within what we're trying to accomplish is set up the base URL for our application. So there is a key called base URL. Pretty much what you're saying is, hey, every time I send out a HTTP request, like a GET request or a post, by default, actually, I want you to use a specific URL, so I don't have to keep retyping the URL. And so in my case, I'm actually going to hit the production zeek.com REST API, which is, I believe this should be it. If I go to, yeah, WP, V2, right? Those are your posts. Cool. Yep. So by default, I want to say, hey, every time I do some kind of access request, use this as the base URL, and then maybe I want to get posts or maybe I want to get pages somehow, and I'll be able to differentiate that, right? So that's a nice little way to be able to save yourself some time while you're doing your request, so you don't have to always repeat out that long string. So now that we've got our base URL set up, the next topic I wanted to cover is get into a little bit about the structure of a Nuxt application. If you notice, there are quite a bit of directories that Nuxt kind of provides for you off the bat. So this can be a bit overwhelming at first. You're like, whoa, what are all these things? Assets, components, layouts, middleware, pages, plugins, server. Like, there are a ton, right? But primarily what I'll focus in on for now is two of them. One is components, and the other one is pages, right? So components is similar to what we've already been using. If you've been using like Vue or React, right? These are just components that you're going to be reusing throughout your application, right? And so this is your traditional Vue file or whatever, right? Nothing new in terms of what it is. A component in this case is a component in Vue land, right? The other one, and this is a new thing, is pages. So what pages is, this is actually a combination of routing within the Vue router. So the nice thing about what Nuxt does in terms of routing is if you put in a particular Vue file in this directory, Vue will automatically create a route for you. So you don't actually have to touch the router file to configure routes and things like that. So it'll know automatically. It uses the directory structure to create routes for you, which is really, really nice. So pages and components work hand in hand. Pages, of course, are pages like the index, which is the home page. Things like if you want an about page, you'll create an about.vue, right? And maybe in about.vue, within that page, you'll use something like the logo, right? And then you'll import that logo, right? So that's an important concept to understand in the sense of pages versus components. Pages, you're talking about things that'll be routes that'll automatically be generated based on a directory structure. And then layout or components rather are things that will be used over and over throughout your application, right? So let's first get started on the index.vue page. That is our home page. I have, like I said, already a lot of this bootstrapped styles and things already in place, just so we kind of take care of a lot of these kind of lower end things. If you're interested in some of these things, the repo is available. You can go through it. No big deal, right? So this hero is really not doing anything. It's just placeholder text. It's just kind of to make it look a little pretty. The very first thing we want to do is if we want to reach out to WordPress and say, hey, WordPress, I want to get some posts. We will have to learn about a new hook that's available, a lifecycle hook that's available only on Nuxt. And that hook is called Async Data. Async Data. So that is a hook, just like if you're familiar with the other Vue lifecycle hooks like created, right? There's also like mounted. If you're used to React, there's like component did mount, component will mount, same thing, right? These are lifecycle hooks. Async data is something that's specific to Nuxt in that what we see here is async is called at the server level, right? So what happens is Nuxt goes through a series of lifecycle hooks, right? When there's an incoming request, there's like this Nuxt server init. That's generally if you're using the Vuex state management library. Maybe you want to do some things onto the store. There's some middleware things that happen that are not too significant at this point. There's some validation that happens. But in our case, there's a couple of new things called async data and fetch that happen right before render on the server, right? So basically what happens here is when we call this particular method, we're saying to Vue on the server, hey, I want you to do something before you send your data over to the browser. It's kind of like in WordPress land, like if you do the add action like init, right? Add init, I want you to like do something, right? So that's kind of what's happening here with the async data. You're saying at the server level, right? I want you to do something in terms of data. Well, what do we want to do? We want to get WordPress posts, right? All right, so async to us passes a parameter called context, and we'll learn a little bit about what that means and what's in there. And so if we want to get posts, right, nothing changes in terms of like how we get posts. It's still an HTTP request. So we can do something like const posts equals what? Equals context.app, right? Context is an object with a lot of things available to us. If we go into the API, we will be able to go to the async data and we'll check out context. And so context has a ton of information inside of it, inside of the object. In our case, app is the actual root Vue instance, right? And so what we want is context.app. And here's where having Axios pays off, because Axios now is a part of the global root Vue instance that we can actually tap into Axios. And then here's where we'll make our GET request. And then what are we going to get? Well, we're going to get posts, right? Okay, so we say, hey, at async data, at this hook, meaning at the server level, I want you to do something. Well, I want you to go get posts, right? And we only put in posts, if we remember, inside of the config. We said, hey, every time I call in Axios, I just want you to use this as the URL, which is why we're able to use posts here instead of having to type in http zeek.com, right? Okay, so fine, we get posts, but we can get a little fancy. We can add, if you know much about async await, we can slap on async await and make this a very clean request instead of having to kind of wrap it in some then promises and etc., right? So what we can do then is say, hey, I want you to go get posts, right? And then what do I want to do? Well, I want to return what? Posts. So now if we go to our site and take a look at, let's get rid of these bugs. We refresh. Uh-oh. Let's take a look at what happened. Looks like our server stopped. That's odd. Let's restart everything. I may have accidentally turned it off by default. Cool. So now if we look, hey, there we go. We've got posts. So, and then inside of post, we got all of our typical WordPress, WP post objects, right? So we've got our 10 posts, everything working as expected, right? So kind of let's kind of go back here and recapitulate what exactly happened, right? We said we called on this async data method, which is a hook, a lifecycle hook for Nuxt that says, hey, I want you to go get some data on the server before you even send it over to the browser. All right, in our case, we want to go get WordPress posts. We're using this async await format to just make it a very clean request since Axios is promise-based, right? And so context.app.axios, right? We're saying go get posts. And once it's done, we're actually returning posts. So why do we have to like wrap it in this object? Why can't we just like say return posts? Well, what'll happen is instead of post being an object, now we have just 10 different posts here. And so things like looping through them will be problematic, right? So then we do something like, okay, well, return posts, but we're actually doing this. Posts are posts, but with some ES6 trickery, right? We don't have to put in that second parameter. We can just say return posts, and then we have our post, right? So now post is available to us inside of our page, and now we can just, go through and we can just put a placeholder here, right? And do what? So we can do our typical v4, right? Posts in posts. We'll bind a key to the post.id. And again, this is normal Vue. We're not doing anything different here. And then we're just doing post.title.render to render out the title. And there we go. There are 10 posts that we got from WordPress. Now, this here on the top, like the v4, like you're not saying doing anything different in the sense of like, hey, do this on the server, right? You're still writing Vue here. There is nothing different. What is different in terms of like server-side rendered is this async data method. This is the secret sauce, if you will, that's saying, hey, I want to go get data in the server before I send it out, like on the request, right? And so if we quickly just refresh the page and we take a look at the page source, what we'll be able to see, more importantly, is the actual delivered HTML, right? This is the proof here that what was delivered over to the browser is HTML, right? If we're in a normal SPA, single page application, we won't see this HTML generated here. We'll just see like the typical div app ID, and that's it, right? But in terms of the source code, hey, this is what actually is getting delivered over to the browser, which is pure raw HTML, which is fantastic. So now that we have our posts, we'll just kind of reconfigure it a little bit just to make sure that it looks a little nicer. So instead of posts, let's get rid of all this stuff here. I don't want to do this. And if you notice on the left-hand side, your typical hot module replacement is shipping as well, so you don't have to worry about refreshing if you do style changes or even state changes as well. So that's a nice one as well, which is kind of expected now. So I want to get posts by category, right? By blog, by WordPress, and by like how-to. Those are 3 separate categories that the Zeek site has. And so this is just normal WordPress REST API stuff here, but we can do something like const blog posts, right? Equals what? Await context. And instead of writing context.app, we can actually get a little fancier and do some ES6 object destructuring and just say app. So instead of context.app, we'll just say app dot the Axios dot get. Of course, we're getting posts. And then for WordPress, for category filtering, we just pass in categories. I know that the blog post is category 41, and then we just also pass in a per page parameter of saying, give me 3 of them, right? And then we'll just repeat this. We will do blog posts, and we'll do, what was the other one? WordPress or how-to posts, and then we'll do WP posts, right? How-to for Zeek are 99 is the category ID, and then 16 is that. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we return these 3. We want to return blog posts, we want to return how-to, and then return WP posts. If we don't return them, they're not going to be available to this particular Vue file. They're just going to be out there, so we can't tap into them. So returning these objects are important to actually rendering the data out. So without this, we're not going to actually have the data available to us. Anyway, so we've got those 3. And now we just, instead in these placeholders, we're going to actually just v4. This is just normal Vue land here. Post in, what did I call blog posts? We'll pass in a key. We will just make it blog post, and then we'll use the key as the post ID. And the reason I'm doing this prepending with the BP is just in the event that there's a post that has the same ID in multiple categories, we still want a sense of uniqueness. That way, Vue doesn't squawk at us for having non-unique IDs, as far as keys rather, so that it can actually re-render things the way it should. I have a component already in place for this. I have a card component, and then as a prop, I'm passing along the post, so I'm just sending the post. So this is just to make life a little easier for us. I've got a little error here. I didn't close out. I didn't make it a self-closing component. So anyway, so we've got that. For time space, I didn't actually get the thumbnail for each one. These are just placeholder tags as well. There are tons of tutorials if you want to actually extend the REST API to include the post thumbnail. But for this tutorial's purposes, was kind of irrelevant in the sense of I really wanted to show you getting data on the server before it gets delivered over, and not so much like the inner workings of the REST API. And there are tons of tutorials out there to do that kind of information. Anyway, so we'll just quickly repeat what we did here into the other stuff. And instead of blog posts, I called it how-to posts. We'll just call this how-to. And this third block here, and we call this WP post, right? And WP. And that should work as expected. Cool. So there we go. We've got server-side rendered posts coming from the WordPress REST API. So when it hits this page, it's not Vue that's actually trying to make the request on the browser. Vue's making the request on the server, and what's being delivered over to the browser is raw HTML, right? Now then Vue takes over if I have some really cool UI effects that happen like on scroll or like whatever the case may be. I'm in Vue land here, so I can actually now tap into a lot of the rich UI experiences that I can create in Vue or if you're used to React, whatever of the two that you work with, right? All right, so that's fine. We've got that. Let's talk a little bit about routing, right, within Nuxt. So I want to get into, the single, post, right? Like, how do I get into that? Nuxt uses under the hood Vue router. So if you're familiar with Vue router, a lot of the terminology is going to be very similar. There might be a few different things in terms of syntax, but if I go into the actual card component, components card, right? Like I want to be able to, like, if I click on this, make this title linkable, right? So right now that title is being generated right here, right? Which is post.child.rendered. And if you're not familiar with this directive HTML, it just allows Vue to parse out the HTML that's being delivered, because WordPress actually sends out HTML, and we don't want to actually render out HTML as a string. We want to actually parse it so it actually gets formatted correctly. Anyway, I want to be able to, like, say something like a tag and like permalink, right? And just wrap it somehow here. And so to do that in Nuxt, there is a Nuxt component called Nuxt link. And so what you do in Nuxt link, just like in the Vue router, there is a to prop, right? That you say, I want it to go where? To somewhere. It could be to the about page or to home or whatever the case may be. Just like any other prop, you can bind it, right? Or just use a shorthand. So it actually evaluates this as a JavaScript expression instead of a string. And then you can pass in an object here, right? And so you can pass in an object with the name of a specific route that you want to send it to, right? In my case, I actually want to send it to a route that I created called ID slug. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means, how that came about, and stuff like that, right? There's also a couple other things we want to pass along to this route. We want to pass along some params, and in these params we want to pass in is the slug, and the slug is what? The post.slug, and I'll show you where that's available to us. The other thing we want to pass along as a param is the post ID. And let me just quickly add a class here just for some styling. I believe no underline. And I want to just make it text black. Anyway, so in terms of like, okay, what does this mean? Vue router is super powerful in the sense of you can pass along things and things will become available to you in a route object that can be used in other components or other pages, right? So what I'm doing here is on the link, I'm actually saying, hey, I want you to go to this particular route, ID slug. And then along with that, I want you to actually pass along some values over to that route that route is then going to be able to use, right? Because the route is not going to know anything about this particular post, right? I want to be able to tell it, hey, there's a slug for this post because I have the slug in this component here. And there's also an ID that I want to pass along to you. So let's quickly talk about what this ID slug means. If you remember at the beginning, I talked about in pages allow you to create routes dynamically within a directory structure. So if I make, in this case, a directory called ID and a file in that directory called slug, now I actually have created something called like myurl.com/ID/slug, right? And so if you notice, if we zoom in just a tad, there's a leading underscore in each of these, whereas index does not. In Nuxt, a leading underscore actually designates a dynamic route, right? Because we don't know what the ID is going to be, and we don't know what the slug is going to be. It's going to be different for each post. So the way to designate a dynamic route in Nuxt is to lead it with a underscore, which is what we've done here. So then the ID is going to be, 1, 2, 3, and the slug's going to be my slug, right? And so in the Nuxt, in the to prop, when we pass along the name, we pass along the parent and the child, right? And so when we go into that particular file now, the slug file, we click into it. Now we're able to go into and see, hey, all right, placeholder title, placeholder copy, cool. So how do we actually get access to the post that we just clicked on, right? So we just clicked on how to increase your website speed using WordPress. Like the expectation is I should see that post. Well, the way to do it, if we go back into the Vue file or the Vue debugger, inside of this one, inside of the route object, we've got some things available to us. Now, if you're not familiar with the router, this is some really cool stuff. Params is available to us because ID and slug. Why? Because remember, we passed it over here in the original link. We said, hey, I want you to go over there and I'm giving you some information. So now the slug can actually use this information to do what? To request a post. Well, we already know how to request posts in Nuxt. We're just going to tap into what? The async attribute. Async data, sorry. And we will make expose app const post equals what? app.axios.get posts and what? Where's the post ID? params.id. And then we just return the post. Got to make sure that I put in await. And I've got some errors. Params is not defined. I need to do, instead of params, I need to pass in params. So now, theoretically, we go in here, hey, there is our post. So what happened there? Params is available as part of context, if I still have that up. Yep. So inside of context, params is an object that's available to us. I just needed to expose it, and I didn't do that. Anyway, so now post is available to us. So now we're just in Vue land, right? So we're just doing v-html, what, post.title.rendered. I can get rid of this placeholder. What is my issue? Yeah, I'm trying to actually parse that. It should just be without the curly braces. Anyway, so there's that. And then we just do v-html again for our content. post.content.rendered. Get rid of this placeholder. And there we go. So, and if you're not familiar, like, hey, how did you get this information? Post.title.rendered. Remember, we went on Async Data, which is happening on the server. And we said, hey, go get the post, but only get a post with a specific ID. In this case, the ID was, let's see what the route says. Route.params 9838. So if I go into seek.com/post/9838, right? That gets me my post. That gets me the how to increase your page speed. And then it's just a matter of post.title.rendered, which is this, and then post.content.rendered, which is that right there. All right. That's how I kind of got that information if you're wondering. All right. So just to kind of recapitulate, we've gone over a lot. The nice thing is you're not really, in a place where you're trying to figure out, oh, am I writing in the server or am I writing in the browser? The key differentiator for us is like, all right, this needs to be in async data. That is a trigger that actually runs into the server, right? Everything else is normal Vue. There's nothing different that's happening here. We're still doing directives and things of that nature and Vue files and all that good stuff. So that's kind of what makes it different as well. Now, one last thing I wanted to mention is layouts. So if you notice here, like there's like no logo or anything like that. Nuxt has this other directory called layout. So on the home page, like you'll notice it's one specific layout, which has the hero, has a hero and stuff, but I don't want to put this on every page. So maybe for like the inside pages, I want a different kind of look, overall kind of skeleton. Well, that's where layouts come into place, right? And so by default, Nuxt kind of just ships with this default layout. There's this thing called a Nuxt component, and that's pretty much Nuxt is gonna render all the pages in that particular template. But if we go and create another template, I created one called Inside. I just applied some extra styling to it, right? Added a Nuxt link with the, to the home page, created, brought in the logo component, and then, just changed the color a little bit because I needed a black instead of a white, right? This is still a Vue file. It's nothing different. The only thing different is you're including this Nuxt component. And the way to actually differentiate layouts is you pass in this layout value, and I believe you just pass in inside. And we've got an error. Can I read property title of undefined? I may have caused an issue here. Oh, that's odd. So if I pass in layout inside, let me just quickly reset the server. And there we go. So there's our inside layout there. So now I've got a different set of layouts depending on what page I'm in, right? So on home page, I use the default layout. And on the inside page, I use the inside layout, right? So kind of bringing it all back. My hope was that you're able to take away just, a little sense of what server-side rendering is within a Vue environment using KnuxJS as the framework for server-side rendered. A big takeaway is you don't have to use Nuxt. You could use server-side rendering on your own within Vue. However, there is a lot of things to know about server-side rendering, so it can be a bit overwhelming, which is where something like Nuxt comes in, and it takes care of a lot of those things for you. So what you're able to see here is kind of a big difference here of like doing something server-side and delivering raw HTML, but then having Vue take over as far as, doing some really rich UI stuff. A lot of things you need to take in consideration, I think, if you want to keep going with something like this is you've got to have the right client. Clients got to make sure that plugins aren't going to be the same thing from what they were used to or what they had expectations, right? So if they come to you and say, hey, I want to add this plugin to my site, well, because Vue and Nuxt are actually generating the actual HTML, those plugins really aren't as relevant anymore because WordPress isn't responsible for generating the front end for you anymore. It's really just your CMS admin, and Nuxt or Vue is really taking care of the render data, the view layer for you. So those are some things that you may want to keep into consideration if you're considering server-side rendering. But I think it's a great bet to take as we move forward and as these libraries become much more rich and robust in terms of kinds of plugins and third-party things that are available to them. The developer experience is fantastic. Tons of wins in terms of performance because it's pure HTML that's delivered, but then you get that great developer experience, those rich UIs that something like Vue can create for you. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter, Jacob Arriola. This will be replayed, I believe. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Hit me up. Be happy to chat about something that you're working on or some questions you have. But hopefully you got some great information, and good luck out there with a lot of the Vue stuff.
Thanks for watching this talk from the JavaScript for WordPress conference. If you're interested in more talks like this, head over to javascriptforwp.com/conference to see an archive of all talks, as well as information about upcoming events.